Menopause, time before your periods stop. This can be anything. For some women, it might only last a couple of years. For other women, and the younger you start having symptoms, the longer it might well outlast. So for some women, it might last for up to 30 years. So our youngest women that we see in clinic is 34, who's got perimenopausal symptoms, and I've got one 18-year-old who's got something called a premature ovarian insufficiency. And that means that she's got a premature menopause, and that's got its own problems that go with it as well. It's usually around the ages of 45 to 48, and I know someone spoke about blood tests. If you're over the age of 45, you don't need any blood tests to tell you that you're menopausal. We can presume that you've got perimenopause. 43, we can still presume you might be perimenopausal. Anything below that, you should have what's called your follicular stimulating hormone checked. And this is the hormone that helps you ovulate. If you're not producing any estrogen, your ovaries not producing eggs, then your FSH will rise. So if you're perimenopausal and you are still having periods, then you need to have it checked twice to see what's going on, but you've got symptoms. Your periods might remain regular, but they might change by a day. Quite often women come in and go, well, my periods, I'm still getting periods every month, but they're only lasting 27 days some months, 30 days the next month, or they'll go 3 months for 27 days and then I'll miss one. So or they've got lighter or heavier. So I have a really heavy bleed for 2 days or 1 day, and then it tails off after, and it's finished after 4 days. So it depends. If there's any change at all from what's normal from you, that's a sign that it is changing. Your hormone levels are changing. And this is at this point is when your mood starts changing. And then you were saying about the anxiety and worrying about your husband, catastrophizing, we call that. And it's a classic sign of the start of your menopause is when you catastrophize, you're worrying overly. And often women say they don't just worry, but they think someone's going to die. But they know that everyone's fit and healthy, but it's still there. And often that goes along with, if you're not sleeping that well at night, you might wake at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly it's being wide awake, heart's pounding, bit hot, and you're worrying, thinking, oh my God, what's happening? And it's all things like that. And this is because the estrogen in our estrogen cells in our hypothalamus and in the back of our brain, in the really deep ancient part of our brain, is what often disappears first. So that's why you might not get hep flushes or night sweats, but you might feel cold more often. You might end up, 1 minute you're freezing cold, put your jumper on, and then you get back to normal. So it's anything like that. So I said that, so it can be up to 15 years, and I think the other thing is, once you get out the other side, life gets better. That's the big thing. Honestly, it's true. So the symptoms of menopause, of course, this is a problem with GPs, and I don't so much have arguments with them nowadays. I used to be ringing GPs a lot, because women would go in with anxiety, or low mood, or stress, feeling stressed. And the first thing the GP would want to put them in is some anti-anxiety medication, so antidepressants or something like that. And my argument would always be, and I was really pleased when someone said that their GP said, well, we'll give it a try, HRT. I really like that, because actually going on HRT, if it works, fantastic. It's better to start that first, because actually if you feel better with that, then that's the right way to go. Whereas if you go on antidepressants and you go through 3 or 4 weeks of hell to get it in there, and then you still know better. And that's what I was seeing women coming in with escalating doses of antidepressants. So they start off classically, what likes to be used is sertraline. So it starts off on 50 milligrams, then it'd be 100, then it'd be 150. And I'd be seeing these women at 200 milligrams of sertraline, trying to bring them back down with adding in HRT, and you can't do it quickly. So that's classic. And the other thing that most women, when they do come in with these low mood and these anxiety, they know it doesn't feel like, I'm not low all the time, I'm not depressed, it feels different to that. And often with those things is that it's because the estrogen levels, and particularly in perimenopause, because they're going up and down like this, You might get up in the morning feeling great, but 10 minutes later you might be driving to work in tears, feeling like you want to drive off the local bridge or something. And that's exactly what it's about like. Hot flushes and night sweats, yeah, you go to the doctor with the hot flushes and night sweats and they'll go, yeah, menopause, yeah, we can treat that. Vaginal dryness is another one that's neglected. It's a really big neglected area, and this can worsen your well-being. If you're getting up, got night sweats in the middle of the night, so you're not sleeping that well with it, but actually every time you turn over in bed, you have to get up to go to the loo. And intercourse is painful. So this all adds up to your well-being disappearing down a bit of a drain really and not feeling great. So the reason we get vaginal dryness is because estrogen is the scaffold of our pelvic floor, keeps everything nice and up. So your back passage, your vaginal area and your vulval area, your bladder. You've got estrogen receptors in your bladder, your urethra, and in the base of your pelvic floor, as well as in your vagina, because that keeps it all really well cushioned and supported. That's because when we lose estrogen, we lose hyaluronic acid in our body and collagen. So we lose that moisture, itchy skin's classic, because we're losing our collagen and the hyaluronic acid. So we become more dehydrated. Same in your vaginal area. And that's a problem. So, and that's when we're going to start getting prolapses as well. And so local estrogen, so even if you can't take normal HRT, if you're going to the loo or you've got urge where you think about the loo and you need to go there and then, or if you get to the loo, you have to just be in there and go quickly, then actually, or you're getting up more than once a night to go for a wee, you've probably got some element of vaginal dryness. Headaches, so again, someone was saying about their headaches, and they start cyclical. So you might never have been a headache or a migraine person before, and then suddenly 3 days before your period, you get a massive headache or a migraine. And this is because of those dropping estrogen levels again. And then dry itchy skin. And then you've got the joint and muscle pain, and that's related, I'm sorry, not all the slides on here, and that's related to, again, the loss of collagen as well. And then the psychological problems, and these often are the things that the GPs don't pick up on, as I said before, the depression, the irritability, constant on the sight of your kids, you know, and not only your own kids, but the kids at school as well, nothing to do with you. So it's all that it's just part of it, sadly, but not everyone. The other thing I want to say is, not everyone will have the same menopause. We're really, really individual, and it's not one size fits all. So what one person has, another person might not. Mood swings, anxiety is a real classic. Poor sleep, and the poor sleep is, we've lost our estrogen, which is part of it, losing our progesterone, which is our relaxing one, but the other thing we lose is melatonin, which gives us our sleep patterns. That also drops at the same time. And we can't give melatonin as a tablet, but estrogen helps pick that back up again. But poor sleep is classically one of the issues. So I had a lady who came to see me who was 67, and we try not to start HRT on women necessarily older than 65, because although it can help, it doesn't give the cardioprotective factors that it does when they're younger. But she tried everything, and she went away, gave her some low-dose HRT, went away. 3 months later, she looked fantastic because she'd just been sleeping and her life was much better. Tiredness, fatigue, because we lose our estrogen, and this goes in with your loss of libido, loss of sex drive. As we lose our estrogen and our body's craving it because it's in every cell of our bodies, what the body does is it gets what gives us our joy in life and our confidence. So this is why you lose your confidence in your jobs, in your life, and your worrying, is our joy in our biggest hormone when we're young is testosterone that's produced out your ovaries. When we don't lose it necessarily when we become menopausal, but what happens, that free testosterone that's given us our sex drive, our joy in life, our confidence, our belief in ourselves, it's sitting there. Body's looking for estrogen. it gets hold of that testosterone by binding it up to something called your sex hormone binding protein. When it binds it up to that, then it can metabolize it into weak estrogen. The same with why you gain weight around your breasts and your tummy, because that's mildly estrogenic. Not great estrogen, but it is mildly estrogenic. So that's a sign of your body hanging on to that, trying to not lose your estrogen. And then because it's bound up in this protein, so it doesn't, you've lost that confidence, you've lost your libido. And that can be an issue for some women as well. And it happens, and that's all bound in with losing your confidence and your confidence in jobs. So when we give you back some HRT and estrogen, that brings that all back and releases that testosterone back again to normality quite often. For 50% of women it won't, but for 50% of women it will. So if you have got symptoms, menopausal symptoms, and you're really struggling, then actually the problem, long-term problems due to lack of estrogen, these are. So osteoporosis, if there's a family history of osteoporosis or osteopenia, you're at higher risk. So it's worth thinking about how much calcium you eat in your diet. It's not the time to go vegan if you can help it. If you've always been vegan, that's different, but don't try it's not worth trying fatty diets at this point. Cardiovascular disease. Everyone always thinks that breast cancer is the biggest killer of women at 60. In actual fact, it's not. It's heart attacks. 60% of women who die at 60 will die from heart attacks. So this is why lifestyle in the perimenopause is so important as well, to prevent that risk of heart attacks. Dementia, we don't know yet. There's still ongoing research, and if anyone's done any research into their own with your brain fog, if you've done any research into menopausal brain fog, then there's a lady over in America called Lisa Mosconi, who wrote a really good book called The XX Brain. And they did studies, and they showed, and they did scans of women who were perimenopausal, and it showed the changes in the brain of why you get brain fog and poor memory, and what an impact it has. So our brain changes, but then what they think happens is it comes back to normal post-menopause, but they're not 100% sure. And the reason they're looking into dementia is because women 2 to 1 get dementia compared to men, and that's a big issue. And it's going to carry on being a bigger factor. The other thing is for women is with the weight gain, we're at increased risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So these are the two biggest public health issues and killers that are going to be coming more and more to the fore as we get older and we go through life. That's the big thing. Over the next few years, I think there's going to be a lot more research into these, and there is starting to be. So that's the problem, because we lose our estrogen. And the reason they think that women get dementia compared to men is men have on the whole, have a steady state of testosterone running around their bodies. It does start dipping as they get older, but not to the extent of women's loss of estrogen. So because of that, they think that men have a layer of estrogen that protects their brains. And whereas women, losing their estrogen completely, haven't got that layer. But they haven't, it's starting to say it, but they're not sure. And it's not saying if you take HRT, you take it forever. They just don't know. They do know, they are starting to say that if you have symptoms when you're perimenopausal and you're young, it's really important that if you can have HRT, you should, because it does protect your mortality in later life. So, lifestyle. So, heart-healthy diet. Every research, and there's more and more coming out at the moment, says Mediterranean diet is the best diet any of us can eat. I know there's things about the low carb, but the Mediterranean diet is basically quite a low carbohydrate diet. They eat a lot of fish, they eat pulses for their carbohydrates, and lentils and beans, which we don't so much. 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. I've got a plate to show you in a minute. And calcium-rich foods. So when you're menopausal, perimenopausal, you should be eating 1,200 milligrams of calcium-rich foods a day. So there's a really good website called the Edinburgh Osteoporosis Calcium Calculator. And if you go on there and put in how much milk, yogurts, it will tell you if you've got the right amount. If not, it's worth having a supplement, because this is for building our bones and keeping our bones strong. The problem that happens for women is we build our bones and they're as strong as men's till we hit menopause. At menopause, they fall off a cliff and our bone density just drops. And this is again to do with our lack of estrogen. So it's a real snowballing effect of losing your estrogen. Reduce caffeine and alcohol. You find that when you're menopausal, trying to deal with alcohol is a nightmare. Because you've lost your estrogen receptors in your liver can't cope with the toxin of alcohol. I'm not saying don't drink it, but I'm just saying you will find that your hangovers will be worse, or your mood the next day might well drop because you're not dealing with the alcohol properly. And moderate exercise, especially weight-bearing exercise and strength training, so lifting little weights or big weight, not too big a weight, because it's a bit of a knock-on effect, because with the lack of collagen that you've got going on, then you can, if you start doing heavy weights, then you put pressure on your back. So it's best just to do hand weights. Be careful with kettlebells, because they can really put pressure on your back if you're struggling. So this is what an ideal plate should look like. So half the plate with vegetables. It's hard with keto diets and stuff where you completely get rid of a whole food group. Really, this doesn't show it right, but really a third of your plate should be some sort of complex carbohydrate. Nuts or wheat or barley, but just be careful, it's got to be complex. And then 2/3, the extra third of it should be your protein, and half a plate of vegetables or fruit. But it should be, and women who are plant-based will have fewer hot flushes and night sweats than women who eat a lot of meat, especially red meat. So, hormone replacement therapy. So the aim of hormone replacement therapy is to replace that lost estrogen. But also, for some women, it's to replace that lost progesterone as well. So, but the main thing about it is replacing that estrogen. When you've got a uterus still in situ, you need to have estrogen and progesterone together. And that's because estrogen thickens up the lining of the womb. So it acts as if you're still having a menstrual cycle almost, because estrogen's role in the body, as well as the egg popping out, is to thicken up the lining of your womb. If we keep thickening it up with just estrogen and estrogen and estrogen, then you'll end up with something called you could end up with something called endometrial cancer. It comes up as endometrial hyperplasia first of all, so thickening of the lining. So you have to have progesterone to go with that. Progesterone, if you've still got periods, so don't let any GP tell you you're still having periods, you can't have HRT. They can do it so that it goes in with your periods. And for women who are having irregular periods, and because estrogen's going up and down like a yo-yo, at this time you might start developing fibroids. So you might get bleeds every 2 weeks. It's really hard balancing that to try and get it right with estrogen. And if you get the right balance, then it will regulate your periods much better and help you feel a whole lot better. The other thing with when you lose the estrogen, and especially if you start having perimenopausal younger, under 45, then you're at a much higher risk of heart disease. The thing with estrogen is it keeps our blood vessels really nice and elastic. And if say you've had some menopausal symptoms and you're 53, go to the doctor and they check your blood pressure, which they will do, and your blood pressure is a bit higher than the normal. They'll go, oh well, we can't give you HRT. Well, actually, that higher blood pressure might well be because you've missed that estrogen already. So it's worth persevering, because using a patch or a gel or a spray of estrogen means there's no higher risk. What the doctor's worried about is if you've got slightly higher blood pressure, then they're worried that you have a stroke or a clot. And actually, with the transdermal, we call it, so the gel spray and patch, there's no increased risk because it's not going through your liver and you're just getting it through your skin. It doesn't increase the risk of your clots or your strokes. The gold standard is body identical. So this means we get fewer side effects with this, and you're more likely to, it's exactly the same as what you produce yourself, and it's plant-based, so lots of women like it. It is on the NHS, it's not weird and wonderful. Although 12 years ago, it would have been counted as weird and wonderful, but now it's not, it's mainstream, and that's what most people use, and it is the gold standard because of that. The other thing is let me go on to this next one. Micronized progesterone, this is something called eutigestin. So a lot of women, I think someone said they had the coil in. So when you've got the coil in, the Mirena coil can act as contraception and also protect the lining of your endometrium. So it'll stop bleeding. It's really good for women who've also possibly got fibroids, as long as they're not too big. And if you've got abnormal bleeding, it will help with that as well. Micronized progesterone, which is natural progesterone, it doesn't increase the risk of a clot. There's no increased risk of breast cancer within the first 5 years of use, because that's everyone's really frightened about. I think it's got better, but a lot of people are really frightened about breast cancer with HRT. The newer ones are so much safer. There was a big study, so before, in the 80s and early 90s, most women, in the UK, 25% of women were on HRT. In America, it was something like 60% of women were on HRT. So Pfizer decided to do a big study. Was it Pfizer or was it independent? Anyway, it was a big study called the Women's Health Initiative. And they thought what this was going to do was show that women were going to feel fantastic being on HRT. What they did was they picked women who had already had heart attacks, who'd already had cancer or breast cancer, who were older. So the average age of the women was 64. Well, actually, we rarely start women on HRT at the age of 64 nowadays, and we wouldn't have done then either. And what the study showed, they had to stop it after about 4 or 5 years, because so many women were developing breast cancer, so many women were having heart attacks and strokes and blood clots. And they used, and they still use it over in the States, they use pregnant horse urine, HRT, and synthetic progestogen. And that was a problem. And this is why, you're talking about education of GPs, this is why we're so far behind, because I remember it coming out, 2002, we had to stop every woman on HRT. We were told, just take them off it. You have to take everybody off it. And then they just had to manage it on their own. And so we're 21 years behind on all the research. And it's really frustrating now, because we have only got one micronized progesterone. There is another good progesterone, but in the UK, because it wasn't financially viable for the pharmaceutical company, they don't sell it here in the UK. So if anybody's on eutigestin at the moment and they've had trouble getting hold of it, it's because it's the only one we've got. And it's a shame, and it's hard, and women, we're fighting you're fighting a battle that we're only just starting, really. I'd say the last 6-7 years has been better. I mean, I remember starting to use HRT again in about 2006, but we were really careful with what we did, and they were on it for the shortest time possible. Once you start on HRT now, and providing it is transdermal, and providing it's micronized progesterone, then you can stay on it for as long as you like. And what they now say, on the back of the WHI study, what they now say is there's a window of opportunity of using HRT, which is within 10 years of your last period or under the age of 60. But a lot of women find that as we get older, our need for estrogen, the female body is absolutely amazing, and as we get older, our need for estrogen decreases. So therefore, that by the time you get to 59, so I got to 60 last year, and I've been on HRT since I was 48, and I'd had a real love, I don't like to talk about this, but I had a real love-hate relationship with HRT because I had really bad bleeding, I didn't get on with the progesterones very well, and I got hit 59, and I thought, right, before I'm 60, I want to come off it. And I came off it, and actually, touch wood, all that anxiety, because I never used to be able to fly, had gone. I will sleep really well. So just to say there is life on the other side of it, and my energy levels are much, much better than they were in the thick of it all. But it is hard sometimes, but not for everyone. Some people will sail through it, and some of you younger ones might have had a chat with your mum already about what was her menopause like. And if your mum had an early menopause, the chances are you might well have an earlier menopause as well. But it doesn't make any, it doesn't go, it's not a rule of thumb. So, the benefits of HRT. So it does protect against cardiovascular disease. However, if you don't have symptoms of menopause, if you're not struggling, if you feel really well, even though your periods are a bit scanty or they're all over the place, then actually it's not a reason to go on HRT. We can't say it's properly cardiovascular protective. If you've got lots of symptoms, and especially hot flushes and night sweats, then actually it's really important, because that is a sign that your blood vessels are losing their elasticity as well. It protects bones, and because of that WHI study, before the WHI study, it was first-line treatment for the prevention of osteoporosis. After that, and it wasn't until about 2010 that they said actually you can have it as second-line treatment of osteoporosis. It's the most effective treatment for menopausal symptoms, and it can also help in the prevention of colorectal cancer. So for women who have a family history of osteoporosis, or have a history of colorectal cancer, or have a history of really early strokes and heart attacks on the maternal side, then actually it is often a really good thing to use. So the risks of HRT. What we always talk about, that the benefits outweigh the risks. In your 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the benefits of HRT far outweigh the risks. Once you start getting into your 60s, then the benefits equal the risks. And then up into the 70s, we say the risks outweigh the benefits. When I first started my clinic, which was a while ago now, pre-pandemic, I had a lady who rang me up. She was 70. She'd been on HRT for 25 years. And she rang me up and she said, I've had a stroke. They've stopped my HRT. How am I going to cope? And she'd been on oral HRT. So beyond 60, if you want to stay on HRT, you should be on the transdermal. And I said, well, I think you should give it a try without. She said, my boobs are going to droop, my bum's going to droop, I'm going to gain weight, I'm going to be awful, I won't be active. And I said, have a go and ring me in 4 weeks and we can have a chat about it. 4 weeks later, she rang me and she said, do you know what? It's not made any difference. In fact, I feel really, really well. And then I followed her up again 3 months later, and she still had no problems at all. So, that's where, although you can stay on it probably around 70, you want to come off and it won't make any difference to your life at all. So the other big thing that everyone's always frightened about is breast cancer and HRT. And I know on social media, there's a lot of talk about, if you go on Instagram and things like that, there's a lot of talk, and on Facebook, that actually if you've had breast cancer, you can have HRT. The British Menopause Society, the International Menopause Society, the European Menopause Society all say that if you have had breast cancer, you should not have HRT. Even if it's negative to estrogen, if you know it's hormone negative, it still is a risk. And there's also talk going on about testosterone and having testosterone alone without HRT for women who've had breast cancer. At the moment, it's not something that is advocated. It may well change at some point, but not at the moment. So, family history. If you've got a mum who's had breast cancer, or your mum and your mum's mum, and a cousin, and an auntie, and you might have had an uncle who's had a brain tumour, all on the maternal side, then the chances are it's one of the BRCA positives, and that's genetic. So you've got a slightly increased risk of breast cancer. So again, that probably, even if you were BRCA negative, you still would be in that increased risk part. So possibly you'd have to have a lot of genetic counselling about whether you can have HRT or not. Ovarian cancer and breast cancer are also part of the hormone-driven cancers. They're estrogen-driven, and they're part of the BRCA1 family. So there's two BRCAs. There's BRCA1, which is ovarian cancer and breast cancer and male breast cancer. And then there's BRCA2, which is the breast cancer. So if anyone's had a member of the family who's had breast cancer in their 30s or 40s, they're at increased risk of breast cancer, and particularly hormone-driven ones. For younger women, so we probably see the most even though we are a private clinic, we see a lot of complicated women who come in who might have a family history of breast cancer, but actually if they're under the age of 51, they can have, and as long as it's not BRCA2 or BRCA1, they can have HRT because there's no increased risk, because the body's expecting lots of hormones to be flying around in there until the age of 51. At that point, you'd want to be stopping it. I've got a lady who's 39, who's BRCA1. She's had a bilateral oophorectomy, so both ovaries taken out, hysterectomy, bilateral mastectomies, because she's at such a high risk. And working with her oncologist, we've decided that she should have HRT. She's a teacher, interestingly, and she couldn't cope. She couldn't work anymore, and she just couldn't cope. And she needed to have it, and she knows that she can only have it till she's 51. And at that point, whatever happens, even though her risks are low now because everything's being removed, but she might still get breast cancer under the skin. So that has a thing. But lifestyle is the biggest contributing factor for breast cancer. So women always get frightened about breast cancer and HRT. So out of every 1,000 women aged between 50 and 59, 23 women, not anything, will get breast cancer in a year out of every 1,000. Using HRT, combined HRT, so progesterone and estrogen, that increases with an extra 4. So that's 27 in every 1,000. If you've had a hysterectomy and you don't need progesterone, and you just have estrogen, that reduces by 3, so it goes down. Then, if you've got a BMI greater than 30, then that increases your risk by an extra 23. So that makes it 46 out of every 1,000. So that's why lifestyle, and by some lifestyle modifications, you can also help some of your menopausal symptoms as well. And obviously our risk increases as we get older, hence why we don't really encourage women over the age of 60 to start having HRT if we can help it, because that will increase their risk of breast cancer, the progesterone part of it. And it doesn't cause it, but if you've got any changes in your breast, it will bring them to the fore. So it's actually, and that's the thing, and it's the progesterone part. So if you can see, reduced with women who have estrogen alone, and the increase with the women who have combined. So it's the progesterone part, but everyone, and I don't know if you've been looking at the Mail on Sunday about HRT and about bits and pieces. They go on about estrogen and stuff. Well, actually, you just want to say, you know, calm down a bit, because it's the progesterone part, not about high doses, because actually, if you're on super high doses of estrogen, that does say you're either not absorbing it or it's not the right product for you. But I always say this, because it's not a cure-all and it's not a panacea for everything. If you've got a really stressful lifestyle, if you've got other things going on, if you're unhappy elsewhere, HRT will not deal with all those issues. And that's really important to know that as well, because people come in to see us thinking it's going to be this great big cure, and it's not always, because your symptoms might not always be menopausal. So if you're really stressed in life, then your cortisol levels are going to be high. If your cortisol levels are high, then actually that comes from your adrenal glands. It comes off the same pathway as your estrogen and progesterone. So if your cortisol levels are high, your body's trying to get those cortisol levels down. So your estrogen and progesterone pathway is neglected, and therefore you're more likely to be struggling with that you think are menopausal symptoms, but they might not be. Same if you over-exercise and you get your period stop. Over-exercising, well, look out for the girls that you teach maybe. You know, if they're really exercising and they're really thin, they're going to have no periods, they're going to have bone problems, and they might well have some symptoms that are menopausal, because their estrogen will be depleted because of how much exercise they're doing, because it knocks the adrenals on the head. Right, I want to talk about this. So, how to go about talking to your GP about symptoms. It's really important, because it is hit and miss where your GP and the nurse. It's really good to hear that it was a nurse that you went to, because I always say that to people: go speak to the nurse. The nurses do your smears, the nurses do your contraceptive advice. The chances are they're the ones who will talk to you about your menopause as well, or they should be. Keep a list of your symptoms, and you know what? Track your cycle. It's really important, and track your symptoms at certain times of the month, because what you might find is, as you go through the month, you might start off, first day of your period is day 1 of your cycle. You might not feel great that day, but day 3 you might start feeling, wow, I feel better. You feel better till you get to ovulation, and then slowly symptoms worsen, and mood dips or mood swings, and then you get to your period. And if you had PMT when you were young, you might have had 1-2 days, and then you bounce back as soon as your period arrived. You might find that this is why it takes 3 days to get better. It's really worth keeping a track of that cycle and those moods and those symptoms at that time, and just monitoring what they are. And then highlighting any changes. Also, I always say to everyone, is do the research. The Women's Health Concern is the British Menopause, it's the patient arm is the British Menopause Society. It's got really good fact sheets on there, just explaining everything about menopause, not just menopause, testosterone, all the things, fibroids, hysterectomies, the lot. And then find out who the person is who knows about women's health. But have a word with the nurse next if you have a smear or you need to go and get any contraception. So, workplace support. So, flexible working arrangements. I know in teaching it's really, really difficult. I go around and talk to a lot of schools and work with a lot of schools, and I know how difficult it is as teachers and in education to actually have flexible working. And you know, if you've got really heavy periods and you're flooding and you're in the middle of teaching, what are you going to do? It's just thinking about stuff like that. Organisational support, being open. And I mean, forums like this are absolutely fantastic, and that you all got together chatting about it. The more we talk about it, the better it makes it for everybody. Menopause workplace policies with human resources input and occupational health. And then adjustments, fans on desks, water available, You can have loo breaks in the middle of teaching if you think, oh my God, my period's coming, I need to go to the loo. Or if you've got problems. So if you've got problems, urinary problems, and you've got no other problems at all, I forgot to mention this bit, and I was talking about losing your estrogen, all you need is local estrogen. And vaginal symptoms of menopause are progressive. So if you're finding, I'm sorry for the men in the room, that when you have intercourse, it feels like sandpaper or it's tight, that's a sure sign you've got some vaginal dryness in there. You just need some local estrogen, and local estrogen, it comes in the form of a pessary or a cream. And if you've got any itching in your vulval area or your vaginal area or even in your anus area, it's worth having it investigated because of that dryness. It's probably, if you're getting recurrent thrush, get it looked at because it might well be vaginal dryness. And getting that, and when we give vaginal dryness, it pops everything back up. So that need to go to the loo in the middle of maybe teaching might disappear. It could be something as simple as that. And then training for staff, and the other thing was support groups, such as a menopause cafe, and somewhere that it's for people to go and talk, women to talk about it. So, tips to help you get through your menopause. So, giving up smoking is a massive one. Women who smoke are likely to have menopausal symptoms 2 years earlier than women who don't smoke. And it is the biggest risk factor for osteoporosis and for heart disease as well. Maintaining a healthy body weight and try to keep it below a size 16 is really hard. And the problem is it becomes a vicious cycle. You're tired because you've lost your estrogen. Because you're tired, you sit on the sofa. Because of that, you can't be bothered to get up. Then your mood dips. And so it's all that vicious downward cycle. And that's really hard to maintain. Remain sociable. That's a classic of menopause, is not wanting to go out, not wanting to see anyone, losing that confidence. And that's often the first sign, if you're in senior management anywhere, of somebody struggling, is that high performer or that person who was really capable, and this is where it's really important that everybody knows about it, might suddenly have these little wobbles or suddenly go, actually, I don't think I'm coping. And they might become more anxious and stressed and might, their sickness records might go up just because they're not coping. Reduce stress, that's a big one. It's important to take time out. And I know, I feel really sorry for all of you in education because you've had the brunt of the whole of the pandemic, I'd say. You had the worst of it in lots of ways. Sleeping in a cool room is really important as well, especially for your hot night sweats and your hot flushes. And then dress in light layers. So you can take them off and take them on as you need to. And take 30 minutes every single day to yourself. Sit quietly, read, do something that brings you back. Because who was saying about disassociation almost? One of you were.
Yeah, wondering who we were.
Yeah. Disassociation is a classic. You don't know who you are anymore and you're not in touch with yourself. 30 minutes a day will give you that time to maybe think about what you need. The other thing, I should have brought, we give out buckets to our ladies. They've got loads of advice, what I'm talking about today. And what we have in the back of that is some journaling so that you can think about, you can sit there, it gives you that time to just write down what's gone well today, what's not gone so well today, what can I do for me? And and some sleep tips. Should have brought a load, I'm sorry I forgot. So, men, how you can help your wives and your partners with this, because it's really important, because it's not just a woman problem. But because it isn't, it's a couple problem often, and it might well be a long rocky road, but it might not be. My husband said to me, God, Hazel, I listen to you talk and I think, I had an easy ride of it, and I said to him, bloody hell, Tim, you don't know the half of it. I just kept it hidden, and that's what we do as women, but you talk about it, and it's really good. One thing I would say about Davina, she's really, really brought it out into the open, and that's amazing. But it is a long, rocky road at times, and there'll be good times and there'll be bad times as well. Every woman has a different menopause. And just be aware of things like, because of body image changing, you don't feel so great about yourself as a woman necessarily, and you can't be bothered, and sex might be painful, so therefore you're going to be reluctant to do it. And when we talk to women who come in for testosterone, because testosterone at the moment is a bit of a hot potato. I think in this area, if you live in Swindon area, you can get testosterone from your GP once it's been started by somebody who's a specialist. In Gloucestershire, they don't even have it, I don't think, on their formulary, so you can't have it at all. And in Bristol area, they're not great at it either. But when we speak to women about testosterone, we also ask them about, is it painful to have intercourse? Because that's the biggest contributing factor to not having intercourse and not having a libido, and also not feeling great about yourself. It's not a straight line. There'll be some times when, and especially in your perimenopause, there'll be some times when you feel fantastic and on the top of the world, and then the next minute you might feel like you want to stick your head in a gas oven, and change your body shape as well, as I said. And the big thing is for men is just support, encourage, you know, don't be too critical, because they don't want, oh, thank you very much, you know, because it's really hard. You feel like, I think it's better because we're talking about it more, but even up until 5-6 years ago, nobody was talking about it. And a lot of women who come in to see us, they only come in to see us because they have an opportunity to talk. So if you're talking at home, it helps an awful lot. Make the supper occasionally, you know, tell her she looks nice. They're really important things. So the last few bits of what I'm going to say. What sort of vitamins and supplements? Do you know what? They are important in your menopause. Vitamin D in particular, massively important. Everyone should be taking, everyone should be taking vitamin D, male, female, anybody, because we don't get enough sun here. Magnesium, because that can also help you sleep, but it helps with your muscles as well, and your bones. And then B12, 50 to 60% of women over the age of 50 will be B12 deficient.
Sorry,
Yes.
if you are on HRT, can you take those vitamins?
Absolutely, you should still be taking it, because HRT is not going to, although it is there to give you your estrogen back, all of us, whoever you are, should be on at least some of these. Because vitamin B12, if you're tired, it's often due to vitamin, or you're achy, it can be due to B12 deficiency. But they, at the moment, it's not always treated, and it's quite a low level that they'll treat at. So if you're at the bottom end of normal, you should be on it anyway, to be honest. Calcium's another one that you should be on. It's fallen off the bottom of my slide here. Probiotics, because there's going to be a lot more research coming out and more facts around probiotics, low mood and gut, because our gut microbiome, when we're menopausal, is not as complicated as it is when we're younger. So hence why having lots of different fruits, but also probiotics will help with that. And there's certain strains that you can use. And then omega-3 fish oils for your heart health as well. And then if you're not going to go on HRT, evening primrose, brilliant if you've got breast tenderness, won't get rid of your hormone, your menopausal symptoms. Ashwagandha, if your only issue is some anxiety, then ashwagandha, it can help with hot flushes, but it can also help with stress and sleep. Same goes for saffron, and it can also help with reducing fatigue in perimenopause, because a lot of women in their perimenopause, when they first start having a few slight symptoms, don't necessarily want to go on HRT, but the research is showing now more and more that women who are perimenopausal are the absolute key ones that should go on HRT, because that's where it's like prevention. It's weird, it sounds weird saying that, I don't mean it like that, but it's like starting it early if you've got symptoms is going to help as you get older to prevent any problems as you get older. And red clover isoflavins, you can't take red clover isoflavins if anyone in the family's had breast cancer and you're not allowed to take HRT because red clover isoflavones metabolize into estrogen in the body. So it's really being careful about these things. And, sorry?
What's the difference between isoflavones and ashwagandha? Is that a type of...
Ashwagandha is an adaptogen, so it's slightly different. It's not, so isoflavones are like soya,
Yeah.
so they metabolize into estrogen. Ashwagandha doesn't.
Because I tried that. I've got endometriosis which stopped. I was on artificial menopause ages ago, and now that I'm in a menopause, I started HRT. It triggered off my endometriosis, and I've had to stop.
Has it? So what? Do you mind me asking in front of everyone? What HRT were you on?
It was transdermal one. It was Evoy Conti.
Yeah, and it
I
made you
just-
bleed and everything.
Just the pain of endometriosis. Yeah.
And were
so I'm
you-
on nothing now.
Did you have were you having periods before you went on the Evoy
Just spots, and before that, I was on the Marinae coil as well,
Conti?
and that was taken out because it was hardly working. It was really complicated, and when I had the artificial menopause with the coil, I developed osteopenia. So I'm in no way is dreadful, and I'm just doing everything.
Are you really struggling now?
Good days and bad days.
So for you, there are things they can.
Well, I've been referred to the menopause clinic, and I'm still waiting 6 months down the line. I'm 57.
57.
And I started struggling with hindsight probably in my 50s, late 40s.
So, and are you having any periods now that you've
No.
stopped your age? So there is one form.
Maybe I can speak to you later.
Yeah, have a chat with me, and I'll have, I'll talk to you about what you might be able to do. Yeah, because that is, yeah, because there is something you could take, but you probably only want to take it for another 3 years and then stop. Although you can take it up into your 70s and you're only still. I'll talk to you about it. You can go back and ask them for that. And at your age, it would probably work for you. Yeah, what else was I saying? Oh, St John's Wort is another one with black cohosh. They can help with low mood and hot flushes. The thing with St John's Wort is you need to be careful with it because it can interact with other medications you're on. So that's a really big thing to think about. And the other thing is, it's not all doom and gloom. Kids are more likely. The whole point of us having a menopause is to lose our reproduction. So of course, because we lose our estrogen, we're losing our maternal instincts. So therefore, you don't give a damn anymore what your kids are doing. As long as you put them up to be alright, you don't worry about them the same, or you shouldn't be. But the problem is for you're younger than me, most of you, but for our generation, we expect ourselves to be fitter and healthier for longer. You know, if you think about your grandmas at 65, they were old ladies, well mine was, and you know, we don't want to be like that, and we're likely to be working longer, and some of you might well be working a lot longer than I'll have to work, but that's, you know, so we want to be fitter for longer, and that's why it's really important that through the menopause and out the other side, we look after ourselves really well, because we don't, so the part of the reason, I don't know if you know about the government strategy, and there's something called a menopause workforce and an APPG, which is an all-party parliamentary group looking at menopause. And the reason that they started doing this is because there was a study done in 1999, because they realised that women got to about 65 and their health suddenly fell off a cliff again. They started developing long-term problems, osteoarthritis, diabetes, just not being fit anymore. Men, theirs didn't happen till they were 72, and they couldn't work out why when women were living longer. And so it's taken them this long to start looking at that properly. Of course, the WHI in the middle of it, just after that, didn't help things, and that's where this all comes from, where there's this trying to make women better, because actually the cost to the NHS and healthcare is huge with women. You know, hip fractures cost something, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. I did used to know, but it's about 13 of, it must be more. It might be about 30 million a year because of, and then the complications of it because of hip fractures is huge. So it's all those things, and that's why it is going to come more and more to the fore. You know, at the moment, there's a reluctance, but it should get better, hopefully. And once you get through it, you do get more confident in yourself. In your 50s, you don't care so much what people think of you. But we are also the squeeze generation because our parents are living longer. We don't have our kids till later. And you were saying about you had your last one at 36. Yeah, and often that can kick you into perimenopause because your ovaries don't bounce back the same with the estrogen. And that's why you start getting the luteal, which is the end of the cycle, where you start struggling with worsening PMT. Oh, sorry, I've ran over, haven't I? I'm so sorry. You should have told me to shut up. Right, I'm really sorry. On that note, I'm finished.
Oh, thank you so much, Hazel. We had to have a Q&A. We have sort of got 2 minutes. If anyone's got any burning questions that kind of, or I'm guessing you might be around for a couple of minutes at the end.
Yeah, of course.
If anybody
I'm
wants
more
to
than
chat with
happy.
you.
Sorry.
One-to-one. But
Yeah.
now would be a really great opportunity, I think, to thank Hazel for her time, but also to thank Sarah for hosting us here at Braden, and Rachel for also giving her personal experiences at the beginning. So I hope everybody will join me in a round of applause for everybody. So yeah, if anybody wants to grab Hazel for the last couple of minutes, but otherwise, thank you very much for your time and hope you have a nice evening.
I'm so sorry I've gone on.
No.
Actually, Sean, you've got our email address, haven't you? If anyone's got any questions,